themselves. We've got a couple of presenters here we want you to hear from. So I'm going to turn it over now to Heather.
Hi, I am Heather Kilborn. I'm with the North Carolina Rules Center, and I just want to make a few announcements as we begin. We hope this to be first of many webinars, and so if you have additional interests that you'd like to see other webinars around some sort of resource development, grant writing, philanthropy type topic, all of you should have an email from me, so you can just email me your ideas. We have an upcoming webinar that the governor's office is going to be offering on grant writing, and also it'll look particularly at people in the disaster recovery areas and grant writing related to disaster recovery. That one will be on November 6th at 2 o'clock, and I will email that information plus how you can join that webinar. So we hope this to be one of many, but thank you all for joining us. We are glad to have you, and thank you to Kelly for providing this.
Great. Now, Carolyn.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Caroline Cox, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of Reynolds Ministries and Programs here at the United Methodist Foundation of Western North Carolina. And first, thank you, Kelly, of the North Carolina Community Foundation for leading us today, and Heather, of course, of the North Carolina Rural Center for inviting us into partnership. And then thank you for tuning in. So I should mention that due to limited time, if you have questions that are very specifically related to grants from the Reynolds Ministry Fund, it may be best for you to email those to me at ccox@umfwnc.org, just following today's webinar. And additionally, I'm pleased to announce that there's another upcoming opportunity to learn even more about the grant writing process. We, the United Methodist Foundation, will host an event in our office in Huntersville, North Carolina on Friday, December 6th. So during the morning hours, a local grant writing expert named Karen Martin will join us. She'll present on the topic of grant writing. I'll be there to answer your questions about the Reynolds Ministry grants. And there will also be a built-in workshop time for you to actually work on further developing your idea or ministry initiative with a small group from your organization, and even really start writing your grant application. So last but not least, I just want to encourage you to listen for what is really at the heart of Kelly's message today. There are plenty of great tips when it comes to grant writing, but it's not so much about finding the right buzzwords or obsessing over avoiding mistakes. From the perspective of the grant-making body, the grantor, we're interested in really understanding the good work that you and your organization are doing, and are looking for ways to help you be successful. People like Royce and Jane Reynolds, whose faithful generosity make it possible to offer you financial support, really want to be in partnership with you. They want you to succeed. But through a grant application process, we're asking to get to know you better. We're hoping to hear that you've really thought things through, and that you understand your own mission and have a plan for making it happen. Royce Reynolds is famous for saying, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we look forward to hearing your plan for measurement of your initiative, management of your initiative, and the fruitfulness that it will surely lead to. So thank you very much for being with us today.
That's a great tip. I love that. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And we're going to talk a little bit about those things, but thanks so much for those introductions, both of you, and we're excited to be here today to talk about this. So a little bit about me. I'm Kelly Joyner-Lee. I work for the North Carolina Community Foundation. I have been a regional director for them for almost 13 years now. I work in Eastern North Carolina, so I'm coming to you today from the historic train station in downtown Rocky Mount. So if you hear trains in the background, that's why. There's also a fire station across the street, so we may get some of that noise too. but that's where I'm coming to you from today. I'm a certified fundraising executive, and in addition to my work with the Community Foundation, I'm also an instructor for the Duke Nonprofit Management Certificate Program. And I co-founded a summit for professional development for nonprofit executives, the Leading for Tomorrow Nonprofit Capacity Building Summit that we do yearly here in Rocky Mount. So I hope you can connect with me later on and find some other opportunities for extra learning throughout the year. So let's get to it. We're going to talk a little bit first about who is on the call today. We were overwhelmed with the fact that 321 people registered for this call today. So that tells us that there are a lot of people who need information on the space for faith-based organizations, places of worship, churches in this community service realm. 69% of those are church or faith community, 19.4% are nonprofit organizations. There's a mysterious 6.4% of others that I'm really curious about. We have 3.2% of community volunteers, great, glad to have our volunteers, and 1% of government. Also, of those on the call, 55% of you consider yourselves to be beginners. So that's good. This is directed just for you. 32% have a little bit of experience with grants. 7% of our pros are on here today. So you've done lots of grant writing, but you want a little bit of extra flavor or knowledge for your future proposals. And 5% of you want to know, what is a grant? So hopefully you will be able to answer that question by the time we end today. So you'll see here, I have a slide talking about faith-based services in rural communities. So faith-based organizations, we all know this, are filling the gaps in the nonprofit community in our rural areas. So a lot of our counties throughout the state, the North Carolina Community Foundation has a focus on rural communities. And a lot of the communities that we serve, it is churches, places of worship, faith-based partners who are providing a majority of those nonprofit services. So we've had a little poll pop up. I hope you can see the poll. If everybody can take just a minute to answer about the projects that you're interested in funding for, to further your faith ministry, to enrich your community through some human service projects that you're offering, or is it a combination of both? So if everybody could just answer that really quickly, we'll kind of know a little bit more about the areas that you are seeking funding for. All right, we'll have some results coming up for that. Let's see, 80% combination, 12% to enrich the community through human service projects, and 8% to further the faith ministry. Great, that's good information to have. So as always, it's usually a combination of both. So very interesting, very good. And you have here a picture of, I told you about my work with the Community Foundation, but before I came to the foundation, I actually worked for 2 years as a program director at this church, which is St. Paul United Methodist in Rocky Mount. So I worked there as a children's program director for a couple of years. So I know your side of it. I know about running those programs within the community and trying to raise funding for those programs, and also, trying to further our mission. And so I definitely have both sides of the coin when it comes to faith-based philanthropy. But when we talk about it, we want to, look at some of those programs that the faith community are huge supporters of. The food pantries, before and after school programs, summer camps, job training programs, emergency and disaster assistance, especially in the past couple of years. It has been a huge, huge issue, especially in Eastern North Carolina. And our faith partners have really, really stepped up and provided just some amazing services, not only in the eye of the storm, not only when everything is going on, but also for long-term recovery, which has truly become a huge issue in our state. And when we talk about these churches and these places of worship, it's very obvious why they are such good partners and such a great match to provide this community work. Our churches and places of worship generally have large buildings. They've got classrooms, they have kitchens, they have gyms, they have playgrounds. We have some that have shower and laundry facilities. They have transportation. Often they have large pools of volunteers and all types of expertise. You've got attorneys, you have teachers, you have doctors, you have all kinds of people within your doors that can help address some of the most critical needs within your communities. And they're plentiful in communities. They're walkable from most neighborhoods. Most neighborhoods have a church that is in close proximity. And many, many of you have unutilized or underutilized space during the week. So that's one of the things that we really look at is what are those resources that make churches or places of worship or faith-based nonprofits very good partners for community work. Now, this little slide, I share this a lot in my grant seeker workshops that I do through the foundation, and it's just kind of funny when you think about grant writers and you think about what is a grant writer, and you got the little thing saying what my friends think I do, what my mom thinks I do, that's true, and what program staff thinks I do. We have this money growing on trees. What your boss thinks you do. I hope that's not what your boss thinks you do. What I think I do, actually sitting here writing, and what it really boils down to is the word count. How many words can I cram all of this information into? But the reason I share this, it's just kind of funny because when we think about grant writing, who sets out their childhood dream to be a grant writer? So surely when you thought about ministry and you thought about going into ministry, you probably didn't think a part of that would be being a grant writer. But in this day and time, it is. We have to have funding and we have to have money to support all of the different things that the church has become or that places of worship have become, because it's no longer just about being inside the doors on the days of worship. So now there is so much community engagement that's involved. We have to have funding to support those programs. So when we talk about grants, just general definition, a grant is a sum of money that's awarded to an organization for a specific purpose. And grants typically have terms and conditions for the use of that money. So it's free money, but it's free money for a specific purpose, and there are terms and conditions for how it is to be used. Grants typically do not have to be paid back, so they're not like loans. That money is given to you for that specific purpose. And grants can be a couple of different ways. They can have an application process where you have to fill out an application for that grant and meet specific criteria to be awarded that funding, or the funding could be awarded through, say, a donor advised fund. Maybe it's just a person within your community with their own private foundation that wants to award money for a specific cause or purpose. So sometimes they can have grant applications. Sometimes it's a conversation. The person wants just a summation of what you're doing, maybe a couple of budgetary things, but there's not a specific application that you fill out for that funding. This graphic's really a really good example of the life cycle of a grant. So if you take a quick look at this, it's generating your idea, finding the funding, developing that proposal, submitting your proposal, the award negotiation and setup of that award, managing your award, and closing out your project. So if you think about this kind of as a wheel, and some people try to jump in this wheel around number 3. So we want to come up with, we're going to have it all outlined and then we'll find the funding. Well, first you've got to have the idea, and then you really need to look for where that funding's going to come from, because sometimes that's going to help shape your proposal. And then, developing your proposal, it's got to fit within the framework. We're going to take a look at some different guidelines for applications, and you'll see exactly how you had to lay out your proposal. There are specific narrative questions. There are specific budgetary questions. They're going to want to know how you're going to measure outcome, all of those things. As far as award negotiation, sometimes you have to, agree to accept the funding, because sometimes there are those caveats with the funding. We're going to award you this, but we only want it to go towards this specific part of your proposal. And then you have to agree to those terms and conditions. Throughout the year, you might be required to invite people for a site visit or host people to come in and see how the funding is being used. Closing out the project, there's almost always a reporting process that has to happen. So it's important to make sure you're in touch with that life cycle of a grant. We'll touch very briefly just on some resources on lingo. Nonprofit churches and places of worship are generally tax-exempt nonprofits anyway. A 501c3 is just a tax designation for a nonprofit. So some churches or places of worship actually establish a separate 501c3 nonprofit for some of their community work. We are going to talk a little bit about when you should do that, or if you should do that. It's not necessarily, the priority for everyone, but it does make sense for a lot of people. I see some action going on in the chat box. We are going to have time for questions at the end, so we'll make sure we scroll through for questions. So if I'm not answering you immediately, just know we are going to get to questions. Application. An application is a collection of required materials for a funding entity. It can be a narrative, a budget, a proposal outline. They may want a list of your board, different things like that. RFP stands for request for proposal. That is basically the call for applications from a funding source. And then we have LOI, which is letter of inquiry or letter of intent. Some funders require that you write them a letter for permission to apply. So that basically would include some information which would allow them to know whether you fit their funding priorities or not. Guidelines, we're going to take an in-depth look at guidelines in just a couple of slides and make sure that we are adhering to our guidelines. Budgets, there are different kinds of budgets. We have organizational budgets, we have program project budgets. Some applications may require both. Some may require one or the other. And I think one of the biggest things to really remind you of at this point is a lot of applications will require you, I know we do, will require you to use their budget template. And the reason for that is because you have people who are reviewing tons of applications. We may have, up to 40 or 50 applications per cycle. It's a whole lot easier for the people reviewing to read all of that information within the same format. So if they require you to use their budget template, you have to use that, even though you may have it in a nice, neat format otherwise, but you can pull the information from there and just plug it in. Organizational budget would be your big overall budget for your whole organization, and program project very specific. So if there's a food pantry, those are the costs per program for that food pantry. The funding period, these are two important ones at the end before we move on. The funding period is basically the timeline that the funding is available. So you may apply for the funding in June, but the awards may not be made until January. So it's really important to know when that funding period is, because your project period has to fit within the funding period. So if you're applying for your summer camp program and the funding's not going to be available until January, you need to be planning for the next year's summer camps, because they're not going to retroactively fund you for the camps that are taking place before the awards are made. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Making sure your project timeline fits within the funding timeline. Very important. So where do we find all these grants? Where do they live? Google. Google is your friend. A quick Google search can provide tons of information about these grants. It's easy, though, to go down the rabbit hole when you start searching for these grants. So my bit of advice would be to be as specific as possible when you are looking for these grants. So if you're looking for funding for a community garden project and you are a church within the United Methodist Church, you could put all of that within the Google search and you're going to come up more streamlined. So my quick Google search as I was preparing for this presentation came up with quite a few. So we have United Methodist Foundation of Western North Carolina, the Duke Endowment, several community foundations. We're very blessed in North Carolina to have a lot of community foundations, but it's super important for you to read their guidelines. Some fund faith-based and some do not, and some have specific guidelines for those faith-based organizations. So it's really, really important to make sure that you read those guidelines. The Cannon Foundation is another one that does fund, and they have about a 5-question kind of survey when you go on their website to see if you qualify for funding. So that's super easy to find out if you would qualify or not. And it'll ask, a couple of different questions about geographic area, focus area, things like that. And then you'll get a little pop-up that says if you can apply or not. The We Raise Foundation was a really interesting national foundation that popped up that you all might want to check out. And I think they are weraise.org. So everybody, they're going to get a ton of hits after this. Everybody's going to be searching on there, but it looked really interesting. So give that one a look. And then North Carolina Grant Watch. So Grant Watch is a membership kind of listserv for grants. And it does dial down as specific for North Carolina. So there's tons of information on there. This is one that you're going to have to set aside that time to really do your homework and look, because it can be super specific for, a specific county, a specific focus area, specific, just super streamlined focus for what the grant is available, but there's a lot of information on there. So North Carolina Grant Watch may be one, and I don't know if the conference maybe could, get a membership and then you would all have access. That's something to think about. Best practices for grant writing. I love this little girl's face because that is totally me when I've given people instructions and then they call me and say, what do I do about this? Well, you read the guidelines, you read the instructions. Guidelines are super important. When we talk about guidelines, the fastest way to lose a funding opportunity is not to follow the instructions. You have to read through the guidelines and then you have to read through them again, because it really is the blueprint for your application. And guidelines are really the first thing that you should find on the website and read. And you want to make sure you're not wasting your time, because grant writing takes some time. So you want to make sure that you're not wasting your time or your funder's time. So really make sure you read those guidelines. And here's where we get to practice our new tricks. So if you will please just bear with me as I pull up these sites. We're going to look at 2 different examples of guidelines. So we are going to look first at the Reynolds guidelines, and then we will look at North Carolina Community Foundation guidelines. So I'm gonna pause and share. So stay with me. Let's see. Okay, do we all have the Reynolds, the Royce and Jane Reynolds Ministry Fund guidelines?
Looks good.
Awesome. Okay, so if we scroll through, if you did a search and found this site, this is what you would come up to. And the first thing that jumps out at me is, does my ministry qualify? So that's going to be the first thing I would spend time reading. And it is very specific that this is all about proclaiming the gospel, seeking and welcoming and gathering persons into the body of Christ, leading persons to commit their lives to God. So you have a lot of information in here. you will have no problem if you're a faith-based organization with this first part. But then we're going to scroll down for the things we are not eligible to support. So salary support, building projects such as brick and mortar projects, debt reduction, parish nursing, or preschools. So if you were looking for funding to fund your church's preschool, this is not the grant for you. This is not going to be where you would find that funding. You've also got some other information over here, things you're going to want to think about. It's got a noon on Saturday, February 1st, 2020. So I'm going to automatically, if this is something I'm going to apply for, I'm going to look at these dates and times. It's going to tell us how you must clearly articulate how your program or initiative aims to make disciples of Jesus Christ. You're going to have to submit a budget proposal indicating how the monies awarded are going to be used. And look, here's their funding period. Monies must be used during the calendar year of 2020. So we talked about that funding period, right? And how our project period needs to fit within that. So you're not going to be applying for something that's going on in 2021. You're going to be applying for something that's going to happen in 2020. So that is, kind of an overview here. And we could take more time and really, dig down into this. And you're going to want to do that if this is, a grant that you're applying for. We see we've got Caroline's contact information right here over to the side. We've got some quotes down here. We've got all of the address and contact information for the foundation. You've got some artifact in here talking about award decisions and what the follow-up and accountability would be. It's got information on what was funded in 2019. That's really important when you're looking for, writing your own grant. You kind of want to know some of that history. So that's always important. So this is one example of some guidelines. We're going to take a look. We'll see how fancy I can get here. I'm going to be super impressed with myself if I do this correctly on the first shot. Do y'all see that? Are we at the Community Foundation? Heather?
It looks great. You got it.
Awesome. This went much better than it did in the practice. So this is the North Carolina Community Foundation's grant page. And lots of information here. This is a different type of grant. So what you need to know before applying for a grant from NCCF. So we've got all of our information here. Let's look at eligibility. What can we do? So you must be qualified as tax-exempt charity for IRS, religious entities, including churches, congregations, and other houses of worship and or faith-based organization whose core functions or operations promote specific religious doctrine or are restricted to members of a particular faith may apply for funding to support social outreach or charitable service programs to benefit the community at large, but they may not apply for general operating support. So that's really super specific, right? So you've got all kinds of information in here. We're going to look at those restrictions. Can't fund annual campaigns, no political purposes, no general operating support for churches. And the main reason for that is general operating support. That money could be used for whatever. So if we're saying you can't use it for specific religious instruction, we can't fund that. But we can fund your preschool program that may do scholarships for children who need that in the community. Or maybe we can fund your van that, does transportation to medical appointments for people in the community. You got deadlines on here. So we would have a grant making calendar we could look at. You've got a whole list here by county, when the deadlines are, different things like that. You can select by county on here. We've got a frequently asked questions. So that's got the types of requests, any application details, terms and conditions. that talks all about what we talked about, the terms and conditions, what kind of forms, when are the follow-ups due. So terms and conditions, agreeing to that has to be turned in 60 days. A full report is due 9 months after the grant is awarded, and you'll receive that information when you're awarded the grant. So there's all kinds of information on websites when you're looking for the applications. Our site, this is pretty cool because you can actually preview the entire application and print it off and work on it that way before you get online. So this is what our application looks like. And you just go through, and it's got, you know, the information that you're going to need on here, what the sources of income are, staff salary percentage, anything about volunteers, which members of the community that you serve, what counties you serve, the type of request, whether it's program project or general operating support. You've got 250 characters to write out your brief summary, your expense summary, how much money you're requesting. That's important, right? And then you would be attaching your budgets in here. So it's got all kinds of information. Again, it's going to have those guidelines, and you're checking off to make sure that you have read those guidelines. So I would just encourage you to look around on several different sites and use those. I'm going to show you a quick, if this will click into it, I'm going to show you a quick example of what our budget template looks like. It's super easy. It's just in Excel. And you'll see here it's got where your, like the total amount of the program project, and then the amount that's being requested. So maybe the total amount is $20,000 and you're requesting $10,000 from us. We're going to want to know where that other $10,000 is coming from. Could be from your church itself. It could be from another foundation or funding source. And then you're going to itemize the expenses. What is that $10,000 for? Is it for food and bags and transportation or anything like that? And you're just going to list it out. So pretty easy to follow. Just making
Kelly,
sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you have the budget template pulled up?
I'm sorry. Can you not see it?
I'm not able to see it. I'm not sure if others are or not.
Can anybody see it?
No, we can't see it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I clicked into that and I thought you would be able to see it. Sorry about that. All right. We'll see if I can get back to my, okay. Are you back to the application? Can everybody see the application? Sorry about that. Okay. So this is just, I wanted to just touch on this so everybody could get a good view of, you know, kind of what an application looks like. And let's see, we'll go back to our PowerPoint. Bear with me just a moment. All right. Everyone back on the PowerPoint. Heather, are we good?
You look good.
Awesome. So now is my favorite part. We're going to talk about unicorns and fence builders. So in life, we have people who are the dreamers, the people with all of the just fabulous ideas. And then we have the people who are the common sense folks who say, how is this even possible? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So my unicorns, these are the dreamers. They are the glitter in life. So we talk about unicorns and fence builders. I have a coworker who refers to it as heart people and head people. And when you talk about unicorns, this is when you're going to grab those people who are the heart people. You're going to tell the story. You're going to tell about why this program or project is going to impact your community and all of that qualitative information. It's the magic in your program. When we talk about our fence builders, this is where you're going to have the framework of your program. So this is where we're really going to talk about, you know, budgets, We're going to talk about measurable outcomes. We're going to talk about data and compliance. This is where you're talking to the head people or the numbers people. So the thing about it is you have to have a delicate balance of both, because you don't know who's reading your application. You could be writing an application that is full of people who are those heart people. And if you are just numbers and data, it may not really tug at those heartstrings. Or the exact opposite. Your application could be so full of glitter that there's not enough data and hard, concrete information. So it's important to have a good balance of both. And I think we have another poll question right now. This would be a good time for that, Heather. Should be popping up. And our poll questions are you a unicorn, a fence builder, or are you sitting on the fence trying to pet the pretty unicorn? Everybody take a second to answer. And then we're going to see the results. We'll see what we're dealing with out there. All right. Let's see. We got, oh, it's a good split of unicorns and fence builders. And then we have a majority of people sitting on the fence trying to pet the pretty unicorn. So good. We will all do well then with grant writing. So we have a pretty good split there. That's just something fun. So when we talk about best practices for grant writing, we want to make sure we're going to talk about the good things, and then we're going to talk about things that are kind of pitfalls in grant writing. So again, making sure we read through the entire application before we begin, making sure we are following directions, setting aside a chunk of time to pull everything together. So I say grant writing is kind of like cooking. If you are going to cook this fabulous dish and this good meal, you've got to read through the recipe first. We got to go, make sure we've got all the ingredients. We have to go get things that we don't have in the pantry at home already. And to be the most efficient, what are we going to do? We're going to go ahead and pull all those ingredients out. We're going to pull out all the pots and pans that we need. We're going to get our cutting board ready. We're going to get all our knives ready. We're going to have the blender out or the mixer or whatever we need before we start, right? And we've got our recipe as the guidelines. So grant writing is just like following that recipe, just like cooking that great meal. If you've got everything right there, then you don't have to spend all that time running back and forth. Oh, I forgot the cinnamon. I got to go get the cinnamon. Oh, I got to go back to the store. I forgot something. If you set yourself up for success on the front end, it's going to make the process a whole lot easier. So that's what I tell everybody. Make sure you read through, follow directions, set aside that chunk of time to pull everything together before you even start. Make sure you help, ask for help. You don't have to do this by yourself. If you are not the finance person in your organization, set aside some time to talk with them about what you're going to need and, get them involved in the process, because it's going to be much better coming from the expert in that area than from you. And knowing the deadline and beating it. Please, please do not wait. If it's due at 12 o'clock at noon on Monday, do not wait until 11:50 at noon and type away furiously that you're going to send it off. So make sure that you are leaving plenty of time, because right when you don't think, something's going to happen, that's when the power is going to go out, or, the internet will go out or something. And once that deadline passes, it's too late. So about the writing style, making sure that we are writing a narrative that is friendly to the reader, making sure it's something that is personal and passionate, and including those equal parts of passion and fact and data that makes it an intriguing read. So another good tip that I tell people is come up with a great title for your program or project, because that's the first thing that we see. So do something that's going to grab my attention when you're writing that title. Make sure you're clear and concise. Follow the format that is requested. So grant writing takes a lot of time, and once you've written a couple of them, it's very tempting to copy and paste it, which is fine for parts, but just make sure it's answering the questions that the funder is asking, because what one funder wants to know might not be important to the next funder. So make sure you're looking at what that person is asking for. The others are just, basic good writing tips anyway. Don't use a lot of jargon or acronyms that are specific to your organization because I might not know them. So make sure that you are listing things that are clear and concise to the reader as if they know nothing about your organization. One really good tip, because I tell people to have other people to proofread their application, not only for typos and things. You can look at your own presentation or your own application and never see a typo because we've looked at it so many times, right? I'm sure I have a typo in this because I've looked at it so many times. But just make sure that you have someone else, a third party, who knows a little bit about what you do but doesn't know the specifics. Let them read through your narrative and tell you if it makes sense or not. That's always a good way to find out if you're hitting the mark with people. Explain your goals for your project and how you're going to achieve them. So it's great for us to say we're going to eliminate hunger in Nash County. Well, first of all, we're probably not going to eliminate hunger in Nash County, but we can definitely make strides towards making sure people have enough food to eat. And how are we going to do that? Just making sure that you are hitting those metrics within your application. Explain how your project is going to benefit the community. What's going to happen if we don't do this project? And again, making sure you proof the work and have someone else proof it as well. As far as the budget, we looked a little bit at what a budget might look like, even though you couldn't see it. If you go on our website, I promise you can click into it and see what examples of a budget look like. Making sure that your budget matches the narrative is super important. So if you have things listed in your narrative, if you're going to do a tutoring program and your narrative has all kinds of information about these curriculum and computers and different things like that, but those aren't outlined in your budget, or vice versa, you didn't mention anything about it in your narrative, but there's $10,000 of computer equipment in your budget, you got to make sure it matches. Double checking your math, making sure things make sense. If you have said that it's going to take $40,000 to do this project, but on your budget things add up to $70,000, we're going to want to know where that discrepancy is. And asking for what you need to accomplish it. Don't ask for less because you don't think you're going to get what you need, but also don't ask for more than you need. That's one thing that we see, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. If you've ever had funding from the organization before, make sure you follow up and that you have met all of the reporting requirements, because if you've received funding before and didn't follow through with your due diligence, you're probably not going to get funded again. Love this little cheesy raccoon here. So we will get all the grants for all the things. Don't be greedy. So a lot of people see, oh, there's $10,000 available. How can I make this $5,000 project into a $10,000 project because they have $10,000? Ask for what you need. Don't chase money. Don't create a program just because there's funding available, because 9 times out of 10, there's already somebody else who is working in that space who can use that grant funding. Look for funding for the projects that are really in your wheelhouse or things that you genuinely want to be involved in. Never make a request to offset a deficit. That goes back to what they said about measurement and management. Nobody wants to fund poor planning. And failing to understand that it is a competitive process. There are always more requests than there are funds available. It does not mean that your organization or your proposal are not stellar. It just means somebody else checked the boxes in a way that really touched that funder and what their purpose of their funding is. More of what not to do, not reading the grant application thoroughly. So just like we printed off that application, we showed you the application, or you can go on and see the application, highlight those dates, highlight those deadlines. Don't think you have more time than you do. Really dedicate time to sitting down and working on it. And another big one, make sure that you're not assuming that people know who you are and what you do, because the people who are making the decisions may not have that familiarity with your organization or what you're trying to do. So just don't depend on, we all think what we're doing is amazing, but don't think that everyone knows about what you're doing. So make sure you do a good job in the narrative of explaining that. Common grant writing pitfalls: just being incomplete, assuming grant writing is a one-person job, using those proposals. If you do use a proposal used for someone else, make sure you go through and take out, names of the other foundation or anything that would make it not specific to what you're applying for. We talked about some of these other things already. And special issues for faith-based organizations. Does your organization really have to have a separate 501c3? Only if you're doing lots of programs and projects where you are seeking big funding from outside sources who are not typical faith-based funders. That's when I would consider it. If you are doing emergency funding or disaster relief funding, or you're doing a lot around, community organizing around issues in your community, then you might need to do that. Otherwise, you just really need to look for things that fit your organization. And making sure they even fund places of worship is super important. How do you keep your community work separate from your faith-based work if required? It's a good practice anyway to track who is utilizing your services, whether that is only people in your congregation or denomination, or do you have a lot of outside community folks who come and take part in your programs or projects? So, that extra little column on an Excel sheet at registration is a good way to do it. Having people fill out just a very brief card when they come in, if they're coming in for, a job training program or anything. How did you hear about us? Are you a member of our congregation? Are you a member of any congregation? Those are important things to kind of track. And that way you can provide that qualitative, quantitative data to the funder. Not only how many people attended, how many people beyond our usual audience attended, and what was the outcome. If we hosted summer camp all summer long and we had 100 kids and 40 of them were our kids and 60 were community kids, and we saw an increase in reading proficiency at the end of the summer, then that's something we want to really capture and share with our funder. We've got another opportunity here. We're running short on time though, and this link is going to be available when we send you the PowerPoint. So I think what I'm going to do is just let you explore this link when you receive the emailed edition of the PowerPoint. This is actually a pay-for service for grants management, but their landing page has lots of great free information. So that's the reason I included it there. But it just really talks more about the types of information that you really need to capture and make sure that you are keeping track of, and how to move through grants management. But again, making sure you keep up with that quantitative and qualitative data. And when you receive grants, making sure you're familiar with those requirements. So looking at, do I have to get this back in within 60 days? Do I have to set up an appointment with them? Are they going to call me? Am I supposed to call them? How is our reporting relationship going to work? Relationship and collaboration, relationship building and collaboration. Don't operate in silos. I think that's the biggest thing that we can, biggest piece of advice that funders want to see is communities working together. And, like I told you, I worked for a church. So I know exactly how that is. We don't want competition among our faith community. We really want to see ways that you can partner together. Invite people in to see what you're doing. And what do you have that can be a resource to your community? And are there any opportunities for collaboration? We don't all need to reinvent the wheel. And, we have so many programs that are going on now around different issues within our community, but it would be amazing if we could coordinate some of those efforts so that we have some people who are addressing that critical need, but some people who are addressing that underlying need. So maybe if we can have, 5 churches that are working on, food insecurity but then we have 5 that are partnering together to address the root cause of that food insecurity. Why are people food insecure? Is there something we can do around helping people get education so they can get jobs, or helping people with addictions so they can keep jobs? So looking at ways that we can collaborate together and who's the best person in that spoke in the wheel to address each of those issues. So in summary, before we take some questions, we've got about 10 minutes left. So before we take some questions, making sure you're prepared, remembering grant writing is a team sport. We're going to get a grant writing buddy. We're not going to procrastinate. We're going to keep those unicorns in the fences. And if we're a unicorn, we're going to find a fence builder, right? We're going to make sure that we are partnering so we're touching the heart and the head when we write these applications. Proofing that grant package and making sure that we have someone else proof it before we hit submit. A lot of times in the electronic age, if you hit submit, there's nothing you can do if you realize you attached the wrong budget or you left a big piece out. It's really important that you do all of that before you hit submit. And so now we're going to leave time for some questions. I got my buddies. I got a picture up here from a grant we did to Canita Family Life Center, which started out of a church in Edgecombe County, and they have a huge community garden project and farm project that is really solving food insecurity issues in eastern North Carolina. So just thought I'd put that up there for motivation before we take questions. So Heather, do you want to relay some questions in our final moments?
Yes, we've already gotten some great questions, and if anybody else wants to put questions into the chat, we'll share as many as we can with the time available. Linda asks about the question, how will you sustain this project? Do you want to say anything about that?
That's a big one, and that's usually a question that's on the application. So if you receive the funding the first year, what's going to happen after that? So we have some projects we in the funding world kind of refer to as one and dones. So we know we're going to fund this thing one time. Maybe we're going to buy the computers for the project one time and then they're going to be able to carry on. But what if it's something they're going to need that continued support for through the years? And that's really where the relationship building comes in, where you're going to really have a relationship with that funder and show them what you're being able to accomplish, and maybe giving them a timeline and say, hey, we know we're going to need support for 2 or 3 years, and setting up that expectation, or asking for introductions to other funders. Or, you know, maybe you get through the first year with funding and it's such a success, you have great funding from your community partners beyond that.
And the next question coming from Martin, what if your grant proposal is not approved? Can you request feedback from the organization?
Yeah, so you absolutely can request feedback. You may receive it, you may not. You may receive it along with the rejection. You may get some information. I know my practice with projects that are not funded, I offer a 15-minute phone consultation when I send the letter that they have not received it. And so we have a 15-minute call and we can talk about if there are issues with the application. Maybe their budget didn't really match up with their narrative. Maybe we had a similar project that would impact 300 people versus 30 people. So sometimes it's just capacity. So we we offer that, definitely. And most funders will, you know, even if they won't schedule a call with you, they can, you know, reply by email just to give you some advice about your application. And, you know, unfortunately, sometimes it's just that there are more requests than there are funds available. And that might be the answer that you receive.
And Eric asked, is there grant writing software for sale?
So I'm sure there is. If you don't find any, let me know and I'll write some and sell it. But I'm sure there are some grant writing softwares. The thing about that is, you know, different applications are so specific. That's going to be difficult. You'd probably be better off to invest in a grant writer. So there are grant writers who offer their services for hire. And you can include that in your proposal, you know, as operational costs, depending on what you're applying for. So, you know, that might be something you want to explore. I'm sure there are some grant writing software just about budgets and measurable outcomes and things like that, just to help you kind of lay out an outline. But again, applications are so specific. I don't know how helpful that would be in the long run. Get a good grant writer.
And Darren asks, what is the best way to secure repeat grants from the same funder?
So the best way to do that is to really build the relationship. So once you find out that you have received a grant, you're going to want to be very appreciative of that grant. You're going to, contact them and thank them. You're going to make sure that you are outlining that you understand all of the requirements, and you're going to invite them to come and see what their funding is helping to accomplish. So if you have events, you're going to invite those funders to come. You are going to send them little notes or emails or letters along the way to say, hey, just want to check in. We're a quarter of the way through. Everything's going great. We're having a lunch and learn in 3 weeks. If you or any of your board members want to attend or whatever, just keeping in touch. I know the projects that really stand out to me are the people who have taken time to form relationships with me. And I don't make any funding decisions, but, my boards make funding decisions. So if every, couple of months I get a note or a phone call from a project that's been funded, I'll pass that on to the board and say, hey, they are having this event. They want to know if you want to come out and see what's going on, or if somebody can attend their luncheon, or if somebody can come talk about something. So I think the people who take the time to reach out and really form relationships are the people who have the most success with repeat funding.
And there was some follow-up questions about finding a grant writer. Where do you find a professional grant writer, and how much do they typically charge, and what should you be looking for?
Right. So, okay, all really good questions. So finding grant writers, there is a super awesome new interactive listserv. It's called, and I'll email the link to Heather so she can send it out. So you don't have to worry about writing down. A colleague who's a consultant actually developed this matchmaking mechanism for nonprofits who are looking for services and consultants who are experts in different fields. So you could go in and create a free profile as an organization, and maybe you need someone to help with grant writing, or you need someone to help with strategic planning. And those are the 2 things you're looking for. And then it would populate and show you all the people in your area who are listed. And then you can interview them and, find out if they fit with what you're doing, and you can hire them from there. As far as cost, I think that really depends on the type of application. I know government grant applications are a lot more intense, labor intense. So those probably would cost more. Some of these folks charge by the project, some charge by the hour of how many hours they spend. And it really varies. I mean, it really does. So, I would budget probably a couple $100 if it's a, pretty average size grant that you're pursuing. If it's a government grant that's going to have a whole lot of oversight, then probably a little bit more.
And we're starting to run out of time, but Nancy asks, is it okay to contact the grantor after submitting the grant to follow up on the status of the decision?
Okay, so this is also really important too. Usually on the website of the funding organization, there is a timeline, or when you submit your application, when you get those pop-ups that kind of say, congratulations, you've submitted, usually that will give kind of a timeline for when decisions are made. I would hesitate to contact about decisions unless it's been a super long time. Like, don't start asking within 2 weeks if decisions have been made, because a lot of times, sorry about that. I'd set an alarm for when our I would err on the side of waiting longer and then just sending an email to say, just checking in on when decisions are going to be made. The thing is, if you have someone who's dealing with 100 applicants and 100 people are sending, these requests every week of when decisions are made, that probably would take up a lot of time of someone who is managing the process. So what I would do is really look for that information first. And if you don't see it anywhere, then it's perfectly fine to send that request.
Well, thank you, Kelly. We appreciate you sharing all your expertise. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but all of you should have my email address, and I am Heather Kilborn, not Betty. So just hit reply, and if you have any other questions, we'll be glad to follow up with Kelly and get those questions answered. And we will also send an email to everyone about how to get to the recorded webinar and upcoming webinars. So thank you so much all for participating, and we'll be following up with more information.
Thanks so much, everyone.